Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's very special Harrogate International Festival's event as part of the Theakston's Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival. Please welcome to the stage Val McDermid.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. Like the man said, my name is Val McDermid, and I am your sort of host for the evening. Just over a year ago, I was sent a proof of a debut novel by my publisher. And they said, "We think you'll like this book." And I read it, and I did indeed like it. And I gave them a blurb quote for the book. But because we're always planning the Harrogate Festival well in advance, I said, "Is there any chance that I can have Robert at Galbraith for my new blood panel?" And the publisher, quick as a flash, said, "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, he's going to be out of the country all summer, so he won't be able to come." A few weeks later, my phone rang on a Saturday night, and it was my publisher saying, "I'm just giving you the heads up because there's a story that's going to be in the papers tomorrow that you might get some phone calls about." And that was the moment when I discovered that Robert Galbraith was indeed my guest for the evening, J.K. Rowling. Now, Robert Galbraith is a debut novelist in one sense, but J.K. Rowling obviously isn't. 400 million sales around the world. The inspiration for the biggest grossing series of movies Hollywood has ever seen. And in 2007, when she was runner-up to Time magazine's Person of the Year, they cited her inspiration was socially, moral, and political. But I think to everybody in here, and to me too, the great thing about J.K. Rowling or Robert Galbraith is the quality of the writing that draws us in and makes us love the books. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome the woman who has made us love her, J.K. Rowling, Robert Galbraith, call her what you will. Go. Good to see you, darling. Okay. You got more applause than me. That's just wrong.
That is wrong. But I applauded you in the
you.
wings.
I knew that. So, the first problem I have this evening is what I'm going to call you. I mean, obviously, I didn't expect I was going to have to be the woman tonight.
I'm sorry.
So, is there anyone in the audience who likes Blackadder? Yeah, okay. So, this is the slightly devious, convoluted route that I came to explain why you chose to call yourself Robert. And I was thinking about Blackadder, where the page introduces herself as Kate, and Blackadder goes, "But that's a woman's name." And she goes, "Yes, Kate, it's short for Bob." Bob. He says, "Bob." And I thought, well, the K stands for Kathleen in your middle name, and this must be short for Kate. And Bob's obviously short for Kate, so that must be why. So I thought perhaps I would just call you Bob.
And I might just adopt that explanation because I think that's much funnier than how I came up with the name.
Good. So, why did you choose to write under a pseudonym in the first place?
Because I wanted to prove to myself that I could get a book published on the merits of the book. Now, a friend of mine, when I said that to her, said, "That is ridiculous. Why do you need that validation?" And I think possibly you would need to be a writer to understand why that was important to me. I just wanted to... I also knew, I had known for a long time that I had this character in my mind and that I wanted to write a detective series. And part of me hoped, vainly as it turned out, but part of me hoped I might be able to keep it long enough, keep the pseudonym going long enough to establish the series in its own right. And it's not really about the hype that comes with being me, because I would never complain about that. It's been in many ways a wonderful, wonderful thing. Well, not necessarily a hype, but obviously a loyal readership is something every writer is thrilled by. But I just wanted something, I suppose, just for me. I just wanted to just put it out there and see what happened. And while it lasted, it was a lot of fun.
And you got very good reviews for the book.
I did, yes, which was wonderful. It was all wonderful. I have to say, I'm not just saying this because she's sitting next to me. When I saw what Val had said about Cuckoo's Calling, I was jumping up and down and squeaking in my kitchen, I tell you. I was a very, very happy woman because I think Val is an absolute master of the genre. And I love Val's books, I love Val's writing, so that was a massive moment for me. So what Val isn't saying is that I wrote Val a thank you letter as Robert.
Yes. Yeah.
In well, not fake handwriting, obviously, it's genuinely handwriting, but I'd practiced a Robert signature, and I wrote this whole thank you letter as Robert, and then, well, what was it, a month later, I was writing you a thank you letter in my handwriting. Now I can write to you in my own handwriting. So, yes, that was an interesting experience. Actually, on the name, I should say, as Val started with the name, there was an economist called J.K. Galbraith, and which I knew, but I hadn't really thought about. And it was only after I'd put the book out to publishers as Robert Galbraith, I suddenly thought, oh my God, people will think I'm hinting J.K. Galbraith, but no one ever did make that connection, thank goodness. You get very paranoid when you're trying to be undercover. So, yeah.
So why did you choose Robert and Galbraith?
I chose Robert. Robert is one of my favourite men's names, and Robert Kennedy is my all-time political hero. And I thank God I hadn't used Robert in any of the Harry Potter books, so I felt it was a clean name from that point of view. And for some reason, I have since childhood had a bit of a thing about the surname Galbraith, and I don't really know why, because I can't remember that I ever knew anyone called Galbraith, but it was always, if I thought of a name for myself, I always wanted to be called Galbraith, so that's why.
Yeah, I think it's funny that thing we get about names.
Yeah.
We writers, we fixate on particular names.
Definitely.
And there are certainly, when I'm writing about their names, I come back to again and again and again and think, I can't use that, I've used that 57 times already. But they resonate for some reason, not necessarily because you've known someone of that name, but they just feel right in your mouth or something.
They do.
Now, after the success of the Harry Potter books, you could have turned to any genre you wanted to. Mm-hmm. You could have written transgender science fiction.
That's
whatever.
Next.
Sorry, I shouldn't have given
You've
that away.
just blown my plan,
okay,
Val.
Yeah. When you told me that in confidence, I thought I'll start a rumour, But you chose crime. Why did you choose crime?
Because I love crime fiction. I've always loved it. I read a lot of it, and I think that the Harry Potter books in many ways are whodunits in disguise. Well, I think you've got 6 whodunits and 1 why was it. So I enjoy that kind of, I enjoy I suppose, the Golden Age book. That's very much what I was trying to do with these books. To take that finite number of suspects, the genuine whodunit style, but make it very contemporary, really bring it up to date, and make sure that this is a credible person with a credible backstory for nowadays. Yeah, so it was a no-brainer. I always wanted to do it. I had that ambition for a long time.
So how did that love affair with crime start for you?
Probably, I know I was reading Christie's when I was quite young. All of the big 4, the Golden Age big 4, Marsh, Allingham, Christie and Sayers, I've read and loved. In fact, my very favourite of those 4 is an Allingham. Yeah. And she's the least known, but it's The Tiger and the Smoke, which I think is a phenomenal novel. I read that one very fraught Christmas when I had a newborn baby. And I read it I'm so tired. I'll never forget how that book held my attention. Every night I would go to bed absolutely exhausted, but I had to read. And it was the only book I've ever read literally page by page, because I couldn't keep my eyes open. But it gripped me so much. So anyone wanting an amazingly atmospheric, this taut narrative, a genuinely terrifying villain, the Tiger and the Smoke.
Yeah, I agree with you about Allingham. I think she's much underrated.
She is very underrated. She was a bit patchy. I think a couple of her other books aren't quite up to that, but some of what she did was up there with anything the others did.
Yeah. I love A Fashion in Shrouds as well.
Yeah, love that
wonderful.
one. Yeah.
Please tell me we're not going to have to fall out over Peter Wimsey. Because he has a face I would never tire of slapping.
Oh, thank God. Thank God you say that. That's so... He irritates the hell out of me. He's so facetious. If he came out with another quotation, I'd brain him. I know you've read a lot of books, Peter. Shut up. Yes, he's very irritating. And yet, she could write. And some of what she wrote was great. And sometimes I think she knew it about herself. She can't resist showing how clever she is. And that's never a very endearing quality in a writer, is it?
Yeah, and you're right, she did write extremely well. I had to go back and look at the end of Gaudy Night for reasons to do with the book I'm writing. And there's a wonderful, wonderful description of Oxford seen from the top of the Radcliffe camera.
Absolutely
and
superb.
It's just breathtaking. It conjures up the whole of that landscape in front of your eyes. So when she did it well, she did it very well indeed.
She did it extremely well.
It's just a shame about Wimsey. If she'd made them the Harriet Vane mysteries, I think we'd all have enjoyed them a lot more.
See, I don't absolutely love Harriet, if I'm honest, but go on. Sorry.
So who else did you read beyond the Golden Age? And I ask you...
Well, I read you, clearly, as we know.
I will pay you the £20.
Thank you.
For some people, it's never enough to have, what is it, last count, several million.
Look, Val, it all adds up, you know. Yeah. No, I read loads of contemporary crime writers. But genuinely, you are probably my favourite. Mark Billingham is amazing. God, there are so many. P.D. James is obviously, P.D. James and Ruth Rendell. Certainly when I was in my teens, I read both of them a lot, really a lot, and they're both very gifted.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, I asked not just as I'm asking not because I'm...
Not because you want to give me 20 quid, but...
No. But because it seems to me there's a quality about your imagination that applies equally to the Harry Potter books as it does to the crime novels. And I think that because you've read widely around both the Harry Potter genre and around...
Well, actually, I didn't. I've read hardly any fantasy.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a dirty secret.
But it seems to me that you've got a knack of like a magpie almost, spotting the best bits, the things that work, and then you pull them together in a synthesis that is quite unique, in fact, entirely unique.
Well, thank you.
And that makes it completely yours. And I wondered if that's something you're conscious of when you're reading, that you're almost, because sometimes when I'm reading, I read it very consciously and think, that's a very clever trick, I'm going to remember how she did that.
Well, with whodunits, I certainly do. That's probably the genre where I have done that most. You notice things, you notice ticks and tricks. In Nio Marsh, you're never the murderer if you've got long, thin fingers. She obviously had a thing about hands, and you're always innocent if you've got pretty hands in Nio Marsh.
Fuck then.
But it's just, you start rolling your eyes when you hear about someone's long fingers. You think, well, that's one suspect down. Clearly, it's not them. Never failed me. Christie, who's someone who interests me a great deal because she was writing for much of her career to outrun the taxman, as we know. Mm-hmm. Hence her incredibly patchy output. But she could shuffle those cards and fool you, couldn't she? Again and again and again. Sometimes very plausibly, sometimes not so plausibly. But she had that almost mathematical ability to fool you. And there's something, not many can do it as well as she did it. Mm. Although the quality of writing I know was patchy. My favourite Christie is The Moving Finger, which is a Miss Marple, but actually narrated by a man, and she does it rather well.
Yeah. It's hard to pick a favourite with Christie, but I cleave to the one that made me fall in love with her and ultimately, therefore, with the crime genre, and The Murder at the Vicarage.
Oh God, that's so goody.
What I love about The Murder at the Vicarage is the humour.
Yeah, she
She's
was very funny.
Yeah. And there's a wonderful bit right at the beginning where she's introducing the 4 spinster women of the parish.
Yeah.
And she says, Miss Hartnell, who was much feared by the poor. you just know exactly the kind of woman this was.
Instantly, yeah.
And I think Christie's never really given credit for her humour.
No, you're so right.
And it's most evident, I think, in the Marples.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Because I think we pick up on that as well and understand that you can use humour within the crime format. So can I move on to Cormoran himself?
Yes.
Cormoran Strike.
Yes.
What moved you to write Private Eye novel at a time when Private Eyes, following the News of the World revelations, Private Eyes have probably never been more loathed in this country?
I know. There are a few reasons. I was consciously trying to write something that was a very, I suppose, quite a classical whodunit. And I wanted to pit a single character, not to have the forensic team, and which I think has been done supremely well and has been done much less well. Do you know what I mean? So there are a lot of followers after that particular. And I wanted to do something very different, and I wanted it to be one character. I also, if I'm honest, saw it as a way of using some life experience that I've had that I never expected to get, insight into different worlds where I never imagined myself venturing. And a private eye, if invited into those worlds, can explore them in a way that a police officer can't. If he's been invited in, if he's being employed, it's double-edged, and that's an interesting conundrum that you have to have allegiance to the person who hired you. But I could see lots of different places to go with that. And then he's a veteran, and I know a few veterans, and my oldest and probably my best friend is still serving. So I had a kind of brains trust for the military that was there and available. And I know that people like Cormoran are out there. You know, people do come out of the forces and they do go into the security world, but they certainly can also follow the route he's followed. So it was plausible, but it was exciting novelistically.
Can I ask why you chose to give him a disability? As you know, he has one leg amputated below the knee, and that's something that is not just a bolt-on, as it were. It's an integral part of how he runs his life.
No, absolutely, and it had to be. I did a phenomenal amount of research and I'm very proud of this. I'm married to a GP who came home and told me in passing that he'd seen someone who had had an amputation. And before he got 2 words in, I said, I hope it's not choke syndrome. And he looked quite blank, and I thought, yes. So he had to look it up on his phone. And yes, so anyway, I know quite a lot about amputations now. No, why has he got the disability? Well, number one, I think that the reality of living with a disability is something that's quite close to my heart. My mother had multiple sclerosis very severely and was certainly latterly disabled. And when you have lived with someone who is daily coping with a disability, in her case it was a wheelchair, in Cormoran's case obviously it's a prosthesis, sometimes it's a stick, you do come to realise that this is every day, day in, day out, can't forget it, got to accommodate it. And it's interesting, and after all, we are currently, unfortunately, seeing a vast number of people returning to this country with these kind of disabilities. And although it's inspirational and marvellous to see the Paralympics, which were an incredible celebration of human will, there's another side to disability. It's not, do you know what I mean? It's once you get off the podium, you're still dealing with it. And there are a lot of people who aren't Olympians who are dealing with it. So I wanted to go there, I wanted to explore it. And of course he can, in The Cuckoo's Calling, he can use it. So he's someone who's got a lot of initiative, and he's someone who will wing it, and sometimes that can be something he can use.
Because I think it's really interesting the way that you've made it simply an integral part of him, and that you see the definite downside, the definite problems, and he doesn't approach this with bravery.
No, it's a real pain in the arse, is what it is.
He gets angry about it. He gets cross about it. He feels sorry for himself at times.
Yeah.
He gets frustrated by it.
Yeah.
So, we're so often presented with the images of disability that are all about, sort of bravery, about overcoming it. But that doesn't deal with the day-to-day difficult of it. And I think that's one of the things that's really striking about the way you've written about it.
Well, thank you, because that's what I was aiming for. I mean, in the deepest sense, I think he is very brave about it. He does get on with it. He's out there earning his own living, and he's, he's fighting to have the life that he has chosen. But yes, of course, at times, my God, the wearisome business of having to factor that in, whatever you do. And, I certainly remember from my mother's experience, when the elevator breaks down and the lift isn't working, these things are just a bit irritating for you and for me, but for someone with a disability, it's pretty massive. So, in The Cuckoo's Calling, you deal with the world of fame. I suppose the sordid backside of glamour, the media's obsession with anyone who has a glimmer of stardust sprinkled over them or more. With the Silkworm, you give us the world of books, of publishing. We've got Bombix Mori, the book within the book, a trick you played with Harry Potter as well on occasion, the idea of this sort of world in which these other books exist, which I love the idea of. And Owen Quine, who has written this libelous and scathing dissection of publishing. So these are two worlds that you know with perhaps more intimacy sometimes than you'd like to have. Who comes under the scalpel next? Well, the next book is quite different. You find out quite a bit more about, I suppose, what happens to people after they leave the military. As I say, I have this group of people who would prefer to remain anonymous, who have given me a lot of information, and a couple of them I can sit down and interview for as long as I want, which is very generous of them. So yeah, I've got some good research to go on for the next book.
Look forward to that one. I'm told, and I don't know if this is true, and I'm sure you'll correct me immediately if it's not true, but I'm told you have an arc, a story arc plan for 7 books for this.
No, it's not 7.
Oh.
No, it's more.
Excellent.
I'm glad you're pleased.
That was clearly the right thing to
Imagine
say.
if you'd groaned, oh, for goodness sake, woman. No,
well, that's my next question, gone.
Oh, no! Well, no, it's not 7. No, I do have I mean, it's pretty open-ended. I really love writing these books, so I don't know that I've got an end point in mind. The great thing, I mean, if I'm absolutely honest, one of the things I absolutely love about this genre is, unlike Harry, where clearly there was a through line, there was an overarching story, a beginning and an end, you're talking about discrete stories. So while your detective lives, you can keep giving him cases. I do have, though, because it's me and because I'm obsessive and because that's just the way I have to work when I'm dealing with characters, I do know a lot about him, and I do know a lot about where he's going, and I know a lot about where Robin's going. So that story, yes, I do have plans for.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the seven Harry Potters made sense in the sense of 7 years of
exactly.
higher education.
That was kind of imposed. Yeah.
But there's no such artificial imposition on this. So
No.
You're essentially saying it will run for as long as you've got stories to tell.
Exactly.
Right. That's good.
Thank you.
I wouldn't have liked to think that there was a final chapter for Cormoran in
No,
the safe somewhere.
No, definitely not.
Good. I wanted to ask you a bit about process. Where does a book start for you?
Well, the odd thing with these two is I had the idea for this plot before I had the idea for that plot. And the reason I did them back to front was that is quite a complex plot. That's probably the most complex plot I've ever written. And I wanted to introduce Strike, the character, in a less ornate plot. I wanted to have the space to introduce him and get his story up and running before I dived into that one. That's where it went. So,
Yeah.
but that plot's been kicking around with me for about 6 years. So when I came to write it, I actually wrote it quite fast for me because I really had thought it out.
So but where did that plot start? Was it something somebody said? Was it something you read? Was it a weird fantasy you were having about life in your publishing house?
Now that would be worrying. The central idea I can't tell you, Val, because for those who've read the book, what came to me was the revelation in chapter 48. Yeah, 48. So if you've read chapter 48, that was the kernel of the idea.
Right.
And then I worked out from that.
How you got there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly right, yeah.
So how much detail do you figure out before you start? Do you plan?
A lot.
Do you do a lot of research?
Both.
Yeah.
This, I did a vast plan, but you should see the plan I've got for the third strike, which is insane. It's the best planned book I will have ever written. It's really, yeah.
So
Lot to keep in. I've got to keep track of a lot of different strands in that book. So I've got this. Where you said to me earlier, we were talking about spreadsheets. It's like a spreadsheet, and it is color coded, so I can keep track of everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's mad.
I used to do that.
You don't need to do it anymore.
No, my process changed. It wasn't that I decided I didn't need to do it anymore. It just stopped working for me. I used to, particularly when I was writing the Kate Brannigans, which are multi-stranded, I used to write them on different coloured file cards because I didn't have Excel in those days. You know, it was back in the days when we were still, like with the chisel and the stone tablets.
Well, I gave Owen Quine the exact typewriter, same model that I wrote Harry Potter on. And the square plastic grey cartridges, and they still make them. I went and checked.
Yeah.
You can still buy them. You can still buy these cartridges, and everything you've written prints out back to front on the little bit of tape. Yes.
Yeah.
So
as I said, I did that. I used to have like pink file cards and blue file cards and yellow file cards for the different strands of the story, and it was almost like countdown. You know, I'll have 2 from the blue pile and 1 from the yellow pile, Carol. You know, 1 from the pink pile. No, I think I'll have another 1 from blue. And that was how I kind of planned it out in those days. And then I was about 15, 16 novels into my career, and it just stopped working.
that's terrifying.
I couldn't break it down into
Oh, no.
chunks anymore.
I don't want it to stop working.
But what I have now is very different, but also very exciting and terrifying. So I just start and then see where I'm going. I'm kind of an overall arc of the story. And I know 1 or 2 of the key points along the way, but a lot of it is just, where do we go next? So that tends to mean that when I get to when I get to the end, the bit that needs most work is the beginning, because that's where I wasn't quite sure where I was going. But once you've got your plan and your spreadsheet, do you have a set working day, or did you have a set number of words, or do you have a set number of hours?
No, I never do a set number of words. The reason I don't do a set number of words is I sometimes consider that I've had a really good day if all I've done is delete stuff. Yeah. And sometimes you've had a fantastic day if you have scribbled a few words down but done a lot of thinking. Mm-hmm. You know, I just think to judge it by, well, I must do 1,000 words today is, you know, it's coming at it from the wrong angle. Unless you've absolutely got to finish something, I suppose, then you've really got to get your head down and just think it is all about word count. But I don't ever want to be there again. I was there a couple of times for the Potters, and I don't ever want to have to work like that again.
Yeah, I think maybe because I was a journalist, I have a slightly different approach. Because when I had the file card system, I used to write about between 1,500 and 2,000 words a day, because I reckoned that after 2,000 words a day, it got to be not very good. And now when I find myself writing sort of sometimes, 5,000, 10,000 words a day on occasion, I just think, I used to think it got to be rubbish after 2,000. It's amazing how much you can kid yourself when you've got to do 10,000 to get the thing finished.
Well, yeah, I hear you. Mm.
Yeah. So it's when you research. I mean, I tend to think that there are 2 kinds of research. There's the research you have to do before you can get started on the book.
Yeah.
things you have to know before you can get going. And then there's all the things that you find out along the way.
Yeah.
Is that how you
Definitely,
work?
exactly. Yeah, very, very, very similar. On well, Silkworm, I didn't need to research the world, obviously, because not that anyone in this book is based on a real person. Just to be very clear about that.
Not even the nice people.
Oh, well, all the nice people are based on lovely people in publishing, no. But the world, the process, you know, the publishing lunches and the publishing party and all these things.
Lunches? Party? Is there something I'm missing here? Lunch? I think the last but one time my publisher took me out to lunch. It was a
Our
sandwich.
mutual editor is here, by the way.
Yeah. It was a sandwich bar in Westminster. Lovely tuna sandwich.
Well, I haven't been for a publishing lunch for a little while. But
Hearing that, she's not had a publishing lunch for a little while.
a little while. I had a very nice lunch when The Casual Vacancy came out, but Robert hasn't had a publishing lunch because his publisher didn't know who he was. Well, obviously, my editor knew who I was, but a lot of people at the publishers didn't know who I was. So Robert never got taken out for lunch. It's a bit too dangerous. What were we talking about? Publishing. Yes, research. Yes. So I do a lot of research. I've now got tomes and tomes and tomes on forensics and decomposition of bodies and the sort of insects that go lay eggs in bodies and all of that kind of stuff that you really do need to know. And you don't need to bore on about it for 5 paragraphs, but you just need to know what they could find, what they would know, what they wouldn't know. And I've conveniently, Strike, my detective, he has good contacts with the Met because he was in the Royal Military Police. They would cooperate on investigations and do so he would have a degree of insight into forensics and so on through them. So if he needs that, and in this book he does exploit that, so he knows roughly when this writer was basically hung, drawn and quartered. Well, he wasn't hung, but he was drawn and quartered.
And of course, his nickname to his police contact is Mystic Bob.
Mystic Bob, yeah, Bob. Exactly.
We're back to Bob again.
We're back to Bob, yeah.
I think that, I don't know about you, but I always reach a point in a book where I feel completely bogged down and it's making no sense to me, and I think this book is crap and nobody's ever going to want to read this book.
Oh, I always do that. That's inevitable.
And I hate it, and I don't know how I'm going to finish this, and it's just awful.
And that's the day you need to take the next day off. And then you need to go back in and read it from start to finish, because you do reach a point, I think, where you are like this with it and you cannot see it anymore. And I've certainly done that, I think, on every novel I've ever written. But on this one, I never got bogged down in the sense that I always felt driven on to complete it. I liked the plot so much. But certainly, I always have my days where I think, well, this is utter crap. And no one's ever going to like this.
So the thing that always gets me through the last bit of the book, probably the last third of the book, when I really profoundly hate it and think it's the worst thing I've ever written, what always drags me through at that point is that I start thinking very seriously about the next book. Because the next book's always much more attractive than the book you're writing now. The next book is going to be the perfect
It's going to be the
book.
best thing you ever wrote in your life.
Exactly.
That
it's got
is
a
so
much
true.
more scintillating plot. It's got much better characters. It's going to flow seamlessly as my fingers rattle across the keyboard.
Well,
and it's getting to that book.
How
that
worrying
gets
is
me
this?
through.
I'm about halfway through the third, and I've just started plotting the fourth. And I'm only halfway through the third.
Well, that's the carrot, though, isn't it?
It is,
It's the carrot, because if I finish this book, I get to write the one I really want to write.
Yeah, that's so true, yeah.
So what's
And maybe that's a way of telling yourself it doesn't matter if this one's not brilliant, because the next one's going to be the one.
Yeah.
It's the one.
So what's going to be, what's the next thing you're going to be doing?
What
Is
overall?
it more Cormoran?
Well,
are there other things in the pipeline?
I've got various things kicking around. I'm working on a script at the moment for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So that's been interesting because I've never written a script before. And so I've got another strike in the pipeline, and then I've got a couple of other things that I really want to do. So the one is still shining in front of me.
Yeah. Was it fun?
Yes, it's been challenging, it's been fascinating, it has been a lot of fun. It's, you know, I sometimes can't believe the nerve of me because I'm not a screenwriter, so how did I end up doing this? But yeah, it's been amazing. It's been a really great experience. But fun though it's been, my first love is definitely novels. Yeah.
If it hadn't worked out the way it has, if you'd sat there and written the book in the cafe and nobody had ever published it, what would you have done with your life? What would you have liked to have been? What direction would you have gone in if this hadn't worked for you?
Well, I think there are two answers. If I could have done anything that I would have been really interested in doing, I would have been a psychologist. Because that is the only thing that's ever pulled me in any way, if I'm honest. But at the time I was teaching and I was very broke and I had a daughter, and I think I would have kept teaching until we were stable enough that I could have changed. But the truth is, Val, I really wanted to be a writer. So probably if it hadn't happened on that book, I'd have gone away and written another book at some point. Yeah. But I did have a strong sense then with the first Harry that unless I did it then, it was going to become very difficult to do it going forward as a lone parent with very little money. You know, you've got to... I had to justify chasing this dream when I had someone depending wholly on me. You know, and sometimes you've got to reconcile those things, and I felt that I could choose to live in poverty if I wanted, but I couldn't really ask someone else to do it, just while I chased something. And I didn't know at that time whether I had the goods, so I might have been chasing it completely fruitlessly. Yeah.
Well, fortunately for all of us, it didn't work out that way.
Thank you very much.
It's probably the long fingers that had something to do with it.
Yes, indeed. A mark of my intrinsic innocence, yes.
Yeah. I have one thing to say before we open it up for questions from the audience, and that is that we all love Robin.
I love Robin. Do you know?
And if you let her marry Matthew, we're all going to be very, very cross.
I have. I have two things to say on that. The first is, I think Robin is the most entirely lovable character I've ever written. Ever written out of all the Potter characters. She's just a good person. And yet she's likable. Sometimes good people, you know, and particularly in books, sometimes goodness isn't that readable. But I love Robin. She's a good woman. And she's a smart woman. And she's a kind and a loyal person, and I really love her. Secondly, you have just gladdened my heart because I, generally speaking, do not read my own reviews, good or bad. It's just not something I do. But occasionally, you'll be reading the newspaper and it's there, and you're halfway into it before you've told yourself you don't do this. Anyway, I read, I think it was The Telegraph, and I was very startled. It was a very nice review, but I was very startled when the reviewer said, although Strike is technically in the wrong more often than Matthew. I thought, what? What are you talking about? He said, we are left in no doubt whom we should sympathise with. I thought, well, he was late to the pub, but he had a good reason. I don't like Matthew. I think it shows, but I really don't like Matthew. No.
Yeah, and it's a terrible thing to say, but I was really glad that his mother died and derailed the wedding. Temporarily, well, at least.
You find out a little bit more about her in the third book, so yeah, she's not a great loss, to be honest with you.
So you may find yourself in some difficulties if you don't heed your fans on that one.
Well, you'll find out in book 3.
Good. So I have done quite enough talking for the moment, and it's time for you to have the opportunity to have some of the questions that some of our audience have delivered for tonight. If we could just have the house lights up, please, so we can see what's what in here. In order to speed the plough and save having someone to run around with a roving mic, the way it's going to work is that I'm going to read out the name of the person who's asked the question, and we'd like them just to stand up and wave, and I will read the question, so we can move along swiftly. So, Is Diana Bradwell in the room? Grand Hall, E8 and E9. Diana, give us a wave.
I see her.
Yes,
Hello,
she's
Diana.
up at the back there waving. Diana's question is, I loved The Cuckoo's Calling. It was one of those books I picked up and read to the end, disregarding anything going on around me. Did you make a conscious decision to have a male detective with a female sidekick, or did it happen organically?
I made a conscious decision. I had a very clear idea of who he was, and I knew he was a big guy. His physicality is quite important in all sorts of ways. You've mentioned the disability. The fact that he's a big man significantly influences how he copes with his disability, because it's just harder if you're a big guy to cope with that. And I saw him as someone who looks surly and is physically quite intimidating and can handle himself, because that's always interesting when you're taking him to some of the places I intend to take him. And it was just felt right to give him a female sidekick who he didn't sleep with. That was quite a frosty little laugh you gave. So, what do you mean?
I think the word yet was hanging in the air.
Never say never. I'm interested in that. I'm very interested in their relationship. I like the fact that it is a genuine friendship, that he's very aware of how attractive she is, but he's also consciously not wanting to act on it. And then, obviously, as time goes on and she becomes his partner, he doesn't want to mess that up. So there is a sexual dynamic to it, of course. But also, Robin's very useful to him because of who she is. She can get him into places. She can charm people. She does it in The Silkworm. And I just think that they've got a good working chemistry. And it enables me to do some interesting things. And in the third book, although I don't want to say too much about that book, Robin gets to do a few things that it wouldn't be possible for him to do alone. So yeah, it was conscious. She was she was a harder character to develop, and yet I love her. She's one of my favourite characters that I've ever written. I really, really love Robin. I think they work really well together. And thank you for the very nice thing you just said about the book. Thank you very much.
I think good people are often the hardest to write, aren't
They
they?
are hard. They are hard. I think it was Forster said, only a writer with a sense of evil can make goodness readable. And I think there's a lot in that, because the preachiness of what we associate with goodness is such a turn-off to the reader and often to the writer as well.
Yeah. So when I was writing Place of Execution, and at the heart of that is a man who is a good man doing the right thing, or trying to do the right thing.
I winced because that's a brilliant read, but it's a tough read. Please continue.
And the thing I found hardest with him was finding a way to convey this good man who does the right things. And I finally got there when I was watching It's a Wonderful Life at Christmas, and I saw good man plagued by self-doubt. Right. And that for me was the key into George Bennett, was giving him that really very human failing.
Yes.
And that made it possible for him to come alive to me, and I hope to come alive off the page. And the next question is from Tim Fee in the Dress Circle. Tim, wave.
Hello, Tim.
Yes, there's Tim waving up there. The characters in your novels have unusual names, like Cormoran Strike. Where does the inspiration for these names come from? Well,
Strike, this is such a personal, stupid thing, but I wanted to give him a name that people got wrong a lot, because Rowling is a nightmare of a name. It's just horrible. I hate the name Rowling, and I wish I'd married my husband before being published, because then I could have been J.K. Murray, which everyone knows how to say and pronounce and spell Murray. But no, I've got Rowling, and everyone says Rowling, and so it was a very silly thing. I wanted to give him a slightly odd name that people got wrong. Cormoran is a Cornish giant, as you find out in The Silkworm, and Strike was an enormous baby, as you might predict from his current size. So that's why I did that, and you hear a little bit more about that in due course. And Strike, I went through several surnames for him, and then I bought a book in Cornwall about Cornish life, and it was written by a man called Strike, someone Strike. and I just knew I had it. I just liked it. So that's how he got his name.
It's that sense of rightness, isn't it? You just...
Yeah, I just knew. The moment I saw it, I thought, bingo, because nothing had quite worked.
Yeah. And the next question comes from Paul Tate, who's also in the dress circle. Are you waving, Paul? Yes. Yes, up there at the end there. Yep. It says, in the past, you've written and published books which have appeared within other novels, as we touched on there. The Tales of Beadle the Bard, for example. Have you any plans on writing and publishing Bombix Mori?
No. Although I do have quite a clear idea about what it's like. But no, I don't think the world's ready for Owen Quine's novel, his final book, even with an introduction by Michael Fancourt. No, I do have a clear idea. I think what that book was, you know, was I think he wrote a novel about Fancourt as the central character, belittling him, and that it was ornate and slightly surreal, as all his work was. And Fancourt's going to sort of neutralise the effect of that by writing the introduction, say, look how magnanimous I am. And, but I don't think it'd be particularly interesting. The more interesting one, for horrible reasons, is the one that, yes.
Yes, quite.
Can't say any more, can I?
Can't give any more away. Can't give any more away. The next question comes from Tracy Rawls, who's also up in the gods, up in the dress circle. Are you waving, Tracy? Can we see you? Yes, there, up towards the pillar there on the right. When you initially outline the plot for your strike novels, do you research and develop most of your ideas at the initial stage, or is this process done as and when the book unfolds and the writing goes forward?
Well, normally I do it all up front, so then I just get to sit and write. But on the third book, I've only done half the research, which is partly to do with places, because there are a couple of places I've never been, and Strike's going to go, so I need to go there, just to see whether what I'm saying happens there, can happen there. It's just a logistical issue, but I can't tell you where that is. Because I like to sneak around to do this stuff. My funniest experience on Silkworm was I was sitting probably about 6 in the morning in the cafe by Smithfield Market in London, where the book opens. And I'd made my husband order the full English breakfast, which is what Strike was going to have, so I could see what it looked like. You know, because you never know. Because you do, Val and I have had this discussion, readers will write in and say, in your novel on page 3, you say that your detective has baked beans, but they don't serve baked beans in that cafe. And if you think I'm joking, come and look at my post bag anytime. Val's got the funniest story about this I've ever heard.
Which one?
The one about the road.
Oh, yes.
This is brilliant and a true story.
Is it one of the Kate Brannigan novels? I wrote. She was driving down a particular road in Manchester, and she turned right at the traffic lights. I got a letter from a guy between the hardback and the paperback coming out. He said, I enjoyed your novel very much. I did notice, however, that Kate Brannigan turns right at this point on Oxford Road. You may be interested to know that the traffic system has been changed. And you can no longer turn right at that junction. You might want to incorporate this change for the paperback. I mean, it was if you're in the room, you know, it was a very kind and thoughtful gesture, but not one that I took up.
So anyway, my husband was eating baked beans, and it's a tiny, tiny little cafe, 24-hour cafe, which can literally, it's like the TARDIS or something. Well, no, it's not like the TARDIS, because the TARDIS is obviously bigger inside. It's titchy, it's like a kiosk. So there were about 4 of us in there, and this man walked in a fluorescent jacket, and he said, "You just said J.K. Rowling's in here." So I sort of froze, because I'd been writing notes on where I was and what I could see out the window. And he said, "Well, I wouldn't know what she looks like." I turned around and walked out again. It's all right then, isn't it? Fine. So my husband finished his breakfast and off we went.
You obviously didn't look like the J.K. Rowling in his head.
I don't think he had any idea of what I looked like at all, I think, you know. But it was an amusing moment. It was the only time when I've been sneaking around, casing things out, and yeah, that I think I've been spotted doing it, so.
Yes, well, probably you weren't wearing your suit at the time.
I wasn't wearing my Roberts suit, no.
You were looking like Bob.
I wasn't Bob.
Do you find it really important to have a clear picture in your head of the backdrop to the action?
Not always. In Cuckoo's Calling, I just invented a couple of places, but that was for logistical reasons. But with Silkworm, I think every location is genuine. And I love London. And I spent some of my 20s in London. I love it as a city. And I consciously wanted London to be a very physical presence in the books. You know, I just enjoy that. And I'll be honest, having invented everything in the Potterverse, there's a real pleasure in getting out in the real world and touching and feeling everything and seeing how that fits together. There's a pleasure in that. It's just a very different process, and I enjoy it. Yeah.
There's another question here from Tiny Van Merode. I'm not quite sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Name.
It's in the Grand Hall. Hey, Tiny, thank you. So the question from Tiny is, what is the thing the author has with Latin? Not only in the HP series, but at least also in the Cuckoo's Calling. Lots of phrases from Latin writers. Is it just for their mystery or something deeper?
Well, I did do classics at university. And in the Strike books, it is a clue as to what he was studying before he left university. So it wouldn't be very typical that a private detective can quote Catullus off the top of his head. So that will become clear as we go on. I have backstory there, yeah. I enjoyed slapping Michael Fancourt down there. Did you notice? If you've read the book, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So.
Yeah. And also, was that what inspired you with some of the Harry Potter?
Oh, with Harry.
Cod Latin.
Yeah, it's very Cod Latin. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes it is. Yeah, I think it was there. It was always quite logical with the Potter books. I always thought, well, what would they use? Well, if magic has existed since time immemorial, you know, all these centuries and centuries back, and why would they have changed it? You know, I suppose it's like. I think it would be useful for them to use Latin or Latin derivatives, partly because it's not a widely spoken language. Imagine if you were using English words as spells and accidentally making magic happen when you didn't mean to. You need to have a separate magical language. Right. So that's where that came from.
And as we say in Latin, et tandem, means and finally, for those of you who are not as well versed in the classics as some of us are.
Absolutely.
Which is a bit odd when you think about it, what a tandem has come to mean in English.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of that.
I suppose I should literally translate this as, and so, on a bicycle made for two. We have a question from Bryony Evans in the Grand Circle.
And Bryony Evans is a name that was in Cuckoo's Calling.
It is. Bryony, are you there?
Hello, 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 hello.
Lovely. And this question is, when you decided to start writing crime fiction, did the character of Cormoran Strike come first, needing a juicy mystery for him to solve? Or was it the plot that required a charismatic detective? And thanks for the namesake in the Cuckoo's Calling.
Oh. She's a bit of a one, your namesake. He came first, I think. But, well, I knew I wanted to write crime. But in all of the crime fiction that I enjoy most, she said immediately, thinking that's not quite true, because I think the weakest thing in Niall Marsh's books is Roderick Allen. Mm. And I think the weakest thing in Sayre's books is whimsy by a mile. So that's not quite true. But in most, Val's would very much be a case in point. I think one of the things that draws me back to a particular writer of crime fiction is the protagonist. You know, I'm interested to see what's going to happen to them next, and I like the way they work, or I just like them as a character. So, yeah, he came first, and then I started thinking of things for him to do. And he ended up working for the News of the World. That was a bit of a surprise to me. I was amused. I have to say, I was very amused when this book came out, because there was a smashing of comments. Oh, she's making a point about phone hacking, and everyone missed the slightly larger point that my detective was actually working for the News of the World, which I thought was slightly more important, because I think he would be. You know, I absolutely think he would be. Strike is not me. Strike, I'm sometimes frustrated by people assuming that you are a character, particularly a central character. I'm emphatically not Strike. I think there are lots of things we would disagree on. I think he would have different politics to me, maybe not in all senses, but there are certain places where I think he would have different politics. I think that he's clearly had a very different life to the life I've led. He treats people at times in a way I wouldn't treat people. But the thing is that I understand exactly why he does those things, and I still feel a huge amount of sympathy for him. I would like him if I met him, but we're certainly not the same person. I personally wouldn't have wanted to go and work for the News of the World, but he does. Seriously, he needs the money. The work's there. He does have certain ethical limits, but yeah, if they're prepared to pay, he's going to do it. So yeah, that's always, I'm sure you feel the same way, people assuming that you are speaking through your character, when of course we have the opportunity to speak for ourselves anytime we want. We don't need to write ourselves into books to do it.
People get very irritated sometimes when that your character says something that you personally would indeed find loathsome, and they find loathsome.
No, absolutely.
And they assume that that's what you think.
Yes,
It's extraordinary.
Yes.
Even more is when they think you're going to look like your character, which you've obviously demonstrated tonight with your butch outfit.
I like it, I tell you, I'm not going back.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the main part of
much.
the evening. I'd like you to thank J.K. Rowling, Robert Galbraith, or Bob.
Bob,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Very much. Thank you.